Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, October 25th, and we're having Dmitry Orlov with us about the conflicts all over the world and BRICS, which is so important. Let's start, Dmitry, with one of the latest articles in the New York Times. It says that Iran is preparing for a big war with Israel. It simply says that Iran is all the scenarios out there. That if Israel wants to attack the scale of attacking Iran, the Iran response to Israel. But do you find it right now when you look at the current phase of the conflict in Middle East and you see U.S. envoy to Hochstein to Lebanon and Antony Blinken to Israel talking with Netanyahu and talking with Lebanese? Do you think Israel is looking for any sort of escalations, or they totally understand that a war with Iran would have a significant influence on their position in the Middle East?
I wouldn't overestimate any of these efforts. Seen has been through that region how many times? He's been constantly there, more or less. I don't know, dozens of trips probably, wasting his breath talking to all sorts of people who don't listen to him. The net result of all of that is zero. Blinken is an embarrassment to everyone at this point because he shows up, he says the same stupid platitudes. He shakes hands. He goes away. Nothing changes. Um, Israel is killing civilians because that's all it knows how to do. I guess it makes the Israelis feel good to just kill a lot of Palestinians and now a lot of Lebanese. They're into genocide. Um, they actually make Nazi Germans look good at this point. Um, and everybody just basically tries to look away because there's very little that they can do. In terms of Iran being ready to demolish Israel, well, it's been ready to demolish Israel for years now. And it's maybe more ready now than it was before. I don't know what the New York Times is talking about. I doubt that the New York Times knows what it's talking about. And in terms of the all-out conflict of Israel with Iran, the problem there is that it doesn't have access. It doesn't have ballistic missiles in at least not make a difference, and it doesn't have a flight path to Iran, to the important parts of Iran. Without mid-air refueling, it doesn't have the capacity to do that either. And so the what Israel ends up doing is killing civilians. And so it'll probably go on killing civilians, and then everybody just to distract from the fact that there's genocide going on, because talking about genocide makes their favorite Middle Eastern partner Israel look bad. They're going to talk about chances of escalation. So we're going to have constant completely vapid and baseless talk about potential for a huge war, for escalation, because they have nothing else to talk about, not because it's so likely. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me right now?
Now I
And
can hear you.
right now, in your opinion, in Israel, do they really think that a conflict with Iran would bring the United States into the conflict in the Middle East? So far, we haven't seen that the Biden administration is interested in escalations in the Middle East, at least when it comes to the participation of the United States into the conflict. They are supporting Israel, but they're not interested in having any sort of escalation in the Middle East because of their economy, because of 2024 presidential election. But it seems that Netanyahu and his administration are thinking that this is their final chance. sees their ultimate chance to bring the United States in?
Well, I don't know that there's that much thought in it. I think that there is their understanding that right now they really have the United States in a chokehold because of the Israeli lobby having such a huge potential effect on the outcome of the elections, so that both candidates have to at least pay lip service to supporting Israel, and the Biden administration actually has to do something about it in terms of shipping in weapons. Uh, but in terms of getting involved in the conflict, the United States is in no position to get involved in any conflict anywhere. It is really in a very, very bad shape militarily. The Russian campaign to deplete the United States and the rest has been extremely successful. Excuse me, so that now the United States is in no position, nor the rest of NATO, to get embroiled in a bigger conflict, be it in the Ukraine, be it in Palestine, be it in China. Um, so that basically it's this careful game of placating the Israeli lobby to make sure that the Israeli lobbyists do not uh, run roughshod over the U.S. presidential election and the congressional elections that are happening there. Once the elections are over, I think the taste for supporting Israeli genocide will suddenly dwindle. That is my prediction.
Do you consider any sort of difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris when it comes to the Middle East?
They're equally stupid. I mean, the remarkable thing about American politics now is that the forces of negative of always choosing the worst possible candidate have resulted over several election cycles, 5 election cycles, in the fact that both parties now have almost completely idiotic candidates running for office, people who really don't know what they're doing. It's really rather obvious with Kamala Harris, who can't put a sentence together. She's a clinical idiot. It's not obvious with Trump because he actually has an aptitude as a sort of carnival barker and talk show host and rabble rouser at big rallies. So he actually knows how to play a crowd. But playing a crowd and working out the intricate details of international relations and military strategy are two completely different things. And I don't think anybody in his right mind would claim that Donald Trump is any sort of an expert on international matters. He has not gone to school for it. The experience that he's had with it really involved around trying to establish personal relationships with various people and talking them up. So he has a good relationship with Kim Jong-un. He has a good relationship with Putin. Oh, by the way, he threatened to bomb Moscow. Well, he didn't. He lied about it. But, it's just all nonsense. And that nonsense is contrived to please his not very intelligent, not very versed audience in the United States. So it doesn't matter which one of them gets elected. The United States is going to continue going in the same rather awful direction, no matter who's in the White House.
Donald Trump recently, in his interviews, he was interested in improving the relationship between the United States and Iran and Russia together. Do you think it's all about his campaign and he's trying to picture something different? As we saw in his first term, he was talking about Syria and he's gonna withdraw the troops from Syria, which didn't happen in those days. Right now, he's talking, when you look at the way that he's trying to comment on Russia and Iran, it seems that he wants to improve the relationship. But is he capable of doing this?
No, he's not. And it's not him, it's the United States. Russia and Iran are very comfortable at this point talking to each other BRICS members, and are just really pleased with the fact that there aren't any Americans or Brits at these BRICS meetings, or in any of their vassals, be they Canadians or Europeans or Australians, whoever. Um, they're working out lots and lots of intricate details of how the world is going to be. That is a world without the United States, because everybody at this point understands where the United States is heading. They're not going to be heading in the same direction. So um, the fact that the United States wants to do something doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. They have blown their chances of making peace with the rest of the world. Now they're basically a spherical object hanging out in a dark vacuum somewhere, and nobody wants to even look in its direction.
If they decide, Dimitri, if they decide to improve the relationship between the United States and Iran, don't you think that would be because of China? Because they want to find China. And as soon as they can defeat China, they come after Iran and Russia.
No, no. Okay, well, you what the game plan is. The game plan is to keep the Ukraine burning, uh, because and threaten the United States with huge embarrassment by which would happen if it pulled out suddenly and denied all support to the Ukrainians, to the Kiev regime. So for that purpose, not even so much Russia, but its BRICS members, Iran and China, are interested in prevention of peace in the Ukraine for as long as possible. Russia is also somewhat interested in prevention of peace because there's a filtration process. Uh, People who hate Russia keep leaving the Ukraine because they don't want to live with Russia. People who love Russia are undermining the Kiev regime and getting ready to live happily ever after as part of Russia. And that whole process is taking a long time because the dividing lines run through families and communities, and these things take a long time to sort out. So that's the Ukraine. Now the Middle East. Russia and Russia is very interested in keeping the Middle East burning because um, that is another place the States is trapped. It cannot, because of the Israeli lobby, deny support for Israel. Meanwhile, Israel is making the United States look terrible in the eyes of the world because Israel is perpetuating genocide. Again, like I said, it's making German Nazis kind of look good in comparison. Um, and that war is depleting Israel and will eventually end in fiasco for Israel, but it could take a long time. So China and Russia are pretty happy with keeping the Middle East burning while again depleting the United States. And then and then of course Iran and Russia are rather interested in having the United States involve itself in all kinds of pointless activities in Taiwan Strait. There's no chance of it ever prevailing in a conflict with China, especially now that China is allied with Russia. Russia would come to China's defense. They've trained to repel American aggression, and given the sorry state of the U.S. Navy and the fact that China is all the way on the other side of the Pacific, there's really no chance that the United States will make any sort of a difference against a Chinese blockade. The plans are pretty well understood. The Chinese are not going to invade Taiwan. They're going to blockade Taiwan. The United States will not be able to do anything about that blockade, and Taiwan will fold. Taiwan will say, "Okay, we're part of China. That's fine. Come on in. We'll figure things out," and that'll be the end of the conflict. But we don't want to rush that because things are fine. Taiwan and China are trading. They have tourists going back and forth. Everything's happy except the United States is threatening war. Well, let the United States keep doing that. So these three areas of conflict are key, and it's a triangle that will eventually lead to the collapse of the strategy in its support for its action in Europe, its action in the Middle East, and its action in the Far East. And that will make everyone happy.
Do you think right now we've seen that both Vladimir Putin and Xi were talking about the situation in the Middle East? You mentioned that they want to let the United States be involved in this conflict in the Middle East. But how about Israel? What do we know about their feeling about Israel? Do they really think that there has to be some sort of pressure on Israel to bring this insanity, this genocide in the Middle East to an end?
Well, it's the insanity is immoral, okay? But there is no morality left in international relations. It was destroyed by the United States. The United States, after all of the attacks on various countries, starting with bombing of Belgrade, including Syria, including Iraq, including Afghanistan, including Libya, and just to mention a few, and all of the terrorist action that the United States provoked and promoted in various parts of the world has killed any concept of morality in public relations, so that anybody now who tries to defend this or that international policy on moral grounds just looks weak, and nobody wants to do it. So, what people instead want to do in the realm of public relations is work for their own people, something that the Americans and the Europeans, by the way, are manifestly failing to do. So, when Xi Jinping talks to Putin, it's him talking to another foreign leader on behalf of his people, and Putin defends and safeguards the prerogatives of the Russian people. He doesn't necessarily directly care about the number of Palestinians killed because those are not Russian citizens. It's very important to understand this fact that the Palestinians, they're not Chinese citizens, they're not Russian citizens. They do not have any priority as far as the leaders of those countries are concerned. So the way they look at it is, how can they make use of what's happening in the Middle East to strengthen their own countries, to strengthen their own people? So, for instance, uh, there were some people in Gaza that were Russian citizens at the beginning of the conflict a year ago. Well, Putin did everything he had to pull those people out, including stepping on the heads of whatever regional leaders he had to, including Israelis. There was no question of denying them access or anything like that. Those people had to leave across the border, the Egyptian border, to Sinai, and they were pulled out in a big hurry. Now, once the Russian citizens were gone from Gaza, all the ones who wanted to leave, much ended direct Russian involvement in those affairs because it no longer had any standing. That is, it could not suffer any damage as a result of anything that would happen there. There were no Russian citizens there. So it's really important to understand the sovereign perspective on these events. It's not some, it's not some table game that different countries play trying to score higher than the next. They actually have national sovereign interests at stake.
How close are Iran and Russia today in order to deal with the conflict in the Middle East? Iran is part of the West Asia, part of the Middle East, and Russia is in Syria, and with Iran, they're having some sort of strategic relationship. But right now, what can we say about the relationship between Iran and Russia?
I think that they have a workable relationship. I think that they can take each other's interests into account. I think Iran is a powerful force in the Middle East, and and Israel, as we saw, is not. Israel is nothing without U.S. support, and the U.S. and the rest of NATO have been very well depleted as a result of the action in Europe, in excuse me, in the Ukraine. So there isn't very much to worry about. So there may be plans for mutual defense, something like that. I don't know that those plans will be executed on in any meaningful way. They might exchange various types of missile technology.
Yeah. And is that going to contribute to the peace in the Middle East?
There is no peace in the Middle East. What do you mean peace in the Middle East? Is there peace in the Middle East? Where have you seen it?
But we're seeking for peace. And
Who's
this relationship is for the future and what's going to happen in the future to the Middle East.
Well, once the United States is out of the picture completely, then yes, there can be peace in the Middle East. But in the meantime, as I explained, China and Russia are interested in keeping the Middle East burning because that depletes the United States, and because Israel looks so bad, makes the United States look bad, and basically frees up the international arena for all of these other actors who uh, don't don't smell so bad.
Yeah. And when it comes to the BRICS, Dimitri, we had China, Russia, India, South Africa, these BRICS members, and Iran, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia didn't come and send its foreign minister, UAE. But you see Venezuela, and a country which was devastated by sanctions. And how do you see right now with this, the latest BRICS summit in Kazan? What would be the message when you see BRICS, a colorful institution that brings all these people, doesn't matter is powerful, is not that powerful, it's under tremendous sanctions, the economy is devastated, or China, Russia, or other countries which are doing great right now, but they're trying to bring all these countries together. And on the other hand, you have G7. When you look at the picture, what are the differences, the main differences in your opinion?
The main difference is that BRICS does not include the former West. And so people are free to talk. They're not being bullied. They're not being threatened with sanctions. They're not having rules rammed down their throats because it's supposedly a rules-based international order. Still, it's not. They're not being told that they have to do X, Y, and Z in order to be part of the international community. And most importantly, they don't have to be in the same room and breathe the same air as the Americans or the Brits. And that, at this point, makes people happy. So there's a lot of fruitful discussion. Now, in terms of what's going on at this big Kazan get-together, shindig, whatever you want to call it, there was a lot of pageantry there. There was a nice concert. The food was really nice. People shook hands. Some of them hugged. And it might give you the idea that this is some kind of a club. Well, you know, it is a club. It is definitely a club. It doesn't invite everyone. There's a vetting process that is rather delicate. Not everybody is allowed in. There's a probation period for getting in, etc. But if that's all you thought it was, then you'd be missing the picture. This is one of maybe 24 BRICS far this year at various levels, at various locations, discussing various issues. So what we see in terms of the public face of BRICS is the tip of the iceberg. The working groups that are working out bilateral relations in terms of avoiding toxic currencies, the euro and the dollar. Um, the various other working groups on trade. Um, that is the important thing. So people are just completely missing what happened at this BRICS meeting. One is that the new bank, the new development bank, um, has grown to over $30 billion worth of investments. That's its investment portfolio now, and over 100 projects. So basically, it's gone on stream. So we may very well expect it to be $30 trillion in a few years, and many thousands of projects, and it will completely supplant other funding mechanisms that exist. That's one thing that happened. Another is an agreement for a commodities exchange for grain, which will no longer have anything to do with the euro. That's a huge deal. Suddenly, the United States and Canada are basically being hung out to dry as far as being able to control things in the grain market. And that's one of the most important markets in the world. Similar similar deals are being worked out with regard to metals and diamonds. Those are two other strategic areas. So eventually, BRICS is just going to take over two countries, three countries at a time over over international trade, excluding the dollar and the euro zones, and basically pushing it out to the margins, not in any kind of a belligerent fashion. It's just the participants that aren't being fair, aren't playing fair, are being slowly sidelined, not even called out. Although Putin did call them out, he said that the Europeans eat more than they catch. Just basically, they're freeloaders. So what should we do with freeloaders? Well, we should slowly cut them off, and that's going to be happening. But that's really the action within BRICS is all of those various committees and working groups and all of those documents and deals that they're producing. So that's the big part. Another big part is that there's now peace between India and China. They have sorted out their border dispute, and now they're ready to take the brakes off the trade deals between China. And that is a gigantic, huge development that everybody seems to have missed. And that happened at this meeting in Kazan. And possibly it's the most important development that has taken place.
You mentioned how important is this negotiations between China and India in terms of, because whenever in the mainstream media, even yesterday I was watching and some of the clips that in CNN, ABC, you name it, and they're talking about that Russia, that China and India, they're having their differences at the border, but it doesn't seem that would be the case anymore. Do you see that this would be the beginning of some sort of understanding within the BRICS members to understand their differences and make a bright future and helping other countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, like other countries, like even we've learned that Pakistan wants to be part of BRICS. Between India and Pakistan, that would be huge as well, Dimitri. Do you think the BRICS countries are growing as time goes by?
Well, yes, obviously, BRICS is the growing part of the world economy, and G7 shrinking part of the world economy. And the shrinkage can pretty much be controlled by turning a few valves inside Russia. So Russia isn't really interested in completely destroying G7, although it could, because who wants these paupers, destitute, begging for help? Let them try to feed themselves for a while longer. But it's clearly understood that those countries, the G7 countries, do not have a future economically, which is why they're being excluded from BRICS. They're not invited. And the other thing about, the peace between India and China and between India and Pakistan and between Iran and Saudi Arabia, you see, that is to a large extent a function of excluding the British. The British are like this little dog that runs around and bites everyone. It bites one side, it bites the other side, and it makes everybody mad, makes everybody want to fight. If you toss the British out of the room, then suddenly everybody becomes agreeable and friendly, and good things happen. So that's what's happened at BRICS. The reason that there's so much more opportunities for peace between BRICS members and aspiring BRICS members, and the reason so many countries, surprising ones like Laos, for instance, Vietnam, who want to join BRICS, the reason that's happening is because there's a goal that is automatically achieved by tossing the Americans and the Brits and the Europeans out of the room. They're the least competent and the most belligerent and the rudest of the bunch. They can't get over the fact that they no longer control anything. They're basically a pain to deal with. So the moment they're out of the room, good things can begin to happen.
And how about the conflict in Ukraine? What was the outcome of this summit? What have we learned from the Russian officials during this summit about Ukraine?
Well, the only time it was brought up was during a Putin press conference, where this correspondent who always says rude things stood up and said rude things. And Putin responded to him and basically put the blame for everything that's happened in the Ukraine um, at the doorstep of the United States, and basically said that this is unfair. It's uh, that the whole crisis, the whole war, was instigated by the Americans, who have repeatedly misled Russia, so they can't really be party to any negotiation anymore. Putin didn't say it in those words, but he recited the entire litany. And so that's that. It is what it is. It is going to end with the dissolution of this former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic that was dreamt up by Lenin, and then perpetuated by Stalin for whatever reason. So the Ukraine is going to be fully decommunized and will cease to exist. It's part of the communist legacy. In terms of BRICS, there was a long communique. I don't know how many points, many dozens of points. Ukraine was mentioned. I think it got 3 lines of text saying that the conflict in the Ukraine should be resolved peacefully. And that's kind of like saying we're in favor of everything that's good and we're against everything that's bad. Who could argue against that? But what that tells us, and the emphasis, is that everybody is happy. BRICS is happy with the way things are going in the Ukraine. And there isn't really any interest in interfering with what Russia is doing there. Russia is doing a good job. That seems to be the message. Everybody is happy with the way Russia is demolishing the Kiev regime and depleting NATO along the way. So that's actually a very useful function of the Russian army at this point. So keep it up. That's the message.
We can say that. How do you find the sentiment in China? Do they really feel that the conflict in Ukraine is not that much beneficial for them, or they're finding the conflict in Ukraine totally beneficial to their interest because of if the United States get out of Ukraine, they can focus on Taiwan.
I don't think that's maybe part of the thinking within the expert community in China, but I'm not part of it, so I don't know what they're thinking. But it stands to reason that the fact that Russia did such a wonderful job of depleting the United States and the rest of NATO was helpful to China because now the United States is much weaker in pursuing its policy of driving a wedge between China and Taiwan. So that's a positive as far as China is concerned. I don't know that there's much more to say about that.
We had Lloyd Austin in Kiev while we had BRICS Summit in Kazan. What is the policy of the Biden administration right now in Ukraine, in your opinion? On one hand, they're talking about that North Korean soldiers, troops are in Russia fighting Ukrainians. Let's send the US troops there to fight them. And or even they're talking about South Korean soldiers going to Ukraine fighting because of North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia. Let's go and fight for Ukrainians. Or they're getting to the point that they totally understand that the conflict in Ukraine is coming to an end. And let's go after some sort of negotiation or maybe some sort of, I don't know, political settlement that considers all the concerns that they're having together with Russia and all the parties involved in this conflict.
Well, let's tackle it from the top. You mentioned Lloyd Austin, and then you went on to mention the Biden administration, as if those were the same thing. Lloyd Austin is in charge of the Pentagon. The Biden administration is not in charge of anything. They have the commander in chief who is probably flopped out on the beach, or it's not. I don't know if it's beach weather anymore in Delaware. It was kind of warm there a few days ago, so he's probably on the beach. So that's pretty much as far as his involvement. Um, he can barely remember where the Ukraine is, and then his shadow government, you could call it, or something like that. They're looking for their next job because Trump isn't going to hire them, and they don't want to work for Kamala Harris. So they're freshening up their resumes. They're not going to be interested in what's going on in the Ukraine while they're freshening up their resumes. Now, why did Lloyd Austin suddenly make this impromptu visit to Kiev while the Kazan conference was getting started, right before it? So the timing was impeccable. That was basically to tell the Zelensky government that if they stage any attacks, drone attacks or rocket attacks or any provocation against Russia while that conference is happening, Lloyd Austin and just shoot Zelensky in the head. I think Lloyd Austin brought a sidearm and pointed it at Zelensky's head and said, any move you make in the direction of Russia in the next few days, and I will pull the trigger. And Zelensky was a good boy for a few days because he was sufficiently scared. So that's what that was all about. Now, moving on to North Korea. North Koreans fighting on the Ukrainian front is a really silly idea because they'd have to get in line. How would North Koreans get ahead of all these other troops, Russian troops that have been training to go to the front, but there's really no demand. You have to understand that everybody wants to go and get a piece of the Ukrainians before it's all over. Less than half of the Russian armed forces are deployed at the front. The rest are training. They all want their stars. They all want decorations. They all want Ukrainian scalps, figuratively speaking. So why would they let some North Koreans jump in ahead of them? I don't see any reason. Now that's all just a complete silly waste of air and completely missing what's happening, which is that Russia and North Korea have signed a treaty, a mutual defense treaty. Russia will now defend the North Korea against any attack by an outside force, be it by South Korea, by the United States, or by Japan. So there will be no war on the Korean Peninsula. That's what that means. That means that the United States can stand down. They can pull their troops out of South Korea if they want to, because those troops are no longer serving a useful purpose except increasing the odds of a war between Russia and the United States.
No.
So that is an interesting development. But in terms of North Koreans helping Russia win against the Ukraine, well, the Ukraine has already lost. Now it's just Russia pursuing its favorite strategy of devastation. That's what it's officially called. Um, and the Ukraine isn't completely devastated yet, so the campaign is ongoing.
In the BRICS Summit, we had Turkey, and at the same time, the Erdogan was in the BRICS Summit in Kazan. We had a terrorist attack in Turkey. Are these two events related to each other, or they're totally different aspects?
Yeah, the terrorist attack is the British basically organizing the terrorist attack to coincide with um, the Kazan conference. They wanted to distract Erdogan. They did not succeed. I think British intelligence is not all it's cracked up to be at this point. I think they can't even organize a good terrorist attack anymore. It's really dwindled. But Erdogan remained. Putin expressed condolences publicly to the people who were harmed in this terrorist attack. Um, Erdogan didn't rush back. He went on, had some meetings, etc., flew back eventually.
When we look at the way that Erdogan is talking about his behavior and his administration's behavior, he's talking about he's trying to make some sort of balance between the East and the West in Turkey, in his view. And but it doesn't seem that in the West they're perceiving the same way. They're thinking that Erdogan is getting away from them. It's just moving toward the East. That's why I think that could be one of the reasons of these terrorist attacks, some sort of this, as you mentioned. And do you think that what is the reality? What the West is seeing in Turkey, what Erdogan is talking about, what's the reality of Turkey today?
Well, look, Turkey is this real non-democracy where if a non-Kemalist government gets elected, then the military has to step in and get rid of that government and reinstall a Kemalist government. So the Islamists make some inroads, but eventually get slapped down, and the regime is returned to its non-religious Kemalist foundations. At the same time, Turkey is part of NATO, which allows the Europeans to infiltrate its military establishment, making its military establishment not as capable of fulfilling that function, and sometimes even staging a coup, as has happened. And as a result of that, a lot of military officers, Turkish military officers, are sitting there in jail now. So it's a really intricate situation. that has to do with the internal composition of the Turkish state. There are other elements to it, which is there's Turkish nationalism, which goes against the grain of the fact that it's got a really large non-Turkish minority consisting of Kurds, and that Turkey is a multinational state, but centered on Turkey as the most important ethnic group. So Turkish nationalism has to be kept at bay as well. But at the same time, there's Kurdish nationalism, which has to be slapped down even harder. Um, uh, Kurdish separatism has to be kept at bay. At the same time, the United States is allied with certain Kurdish elements, especially the ones across the border in Syria, and of course in the north of Iraq, which complicates things for Turkey. So Turkey has to be, as part of NATO, has to play well with the United States, but the United States is working to undermine Turkey politically. And there's a news item, which is Gulen he's kicked the bucket. He's dead in Pennsylvania somewhere. And he was, first of all, Erdogan is a creature of Gulenism initially, but they had a falling out and became bitter enemies. And then Gulen fled to the United States, and the United States has used Gulen as a thorn in Erdogan's side ever since. So now that Gulen has kicked the bucket, his organization, which exists all over the Turkic-speaking world, is probably going to be weakened, and that's a really good thing for Erdogan. So that's a positive development for him. He must be quite happy.
Yeah. Before wrapping up this session, Dmitry, I want to talk about Saudi Arabia. They have decided to send their foreign minister to BRICS Summit in Kazan. What can we understand about their behavior? What are they looking for by joining BRICS? Are they still afraid of the United States? Are they still thinking that which would be our way to go? Are we going to go toward the west or toward the east? Or they know where they're going to go, but they're buying time because of the United States?
Well, there's a very good working relationship in Russia and Saudi Arabia. They together control the oil market as BRICS Plus. And that's a very important relationship, but it's pretty well cemented. There's nothing to particularly work out, which is why the head of state didn't come to the meeting. There was probably something more important for him to do. And in terms of going to the west, going to the east, well, where is their oil going? That's the important question. It's going all over the place. So Saudi Arabia is not going to foreclose any options to sell its oil anywhere. And that's going to be its position. And it's very well understood by everyone. And so there isn't any question of Saudi Arabia going this way or going that way. Saudi Arabia goes wherever its oil goes, which is everywhere.
Thank you so much, Dimitri, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you.